Alright guys, back in the garage again, getting this Xtrainer prepped for a little afternoon ride this week, and I thought I'd do a quick review of it. So far I've got this about 115 hours on this bike. It's a 2017 Xtrainer, and I gotta say I'm really in love with this bike. A lot of people think it's a beginner's bike or it's a kid's bike or something for your wife or your girlfriend, but if you like to ride the more extreme stuff, or even just a single track rider, this is an excellent choice. I'm 6'2", about 215 pounds, and this bike handles me well. I did raise the bars and move them forward a little bit to give me some extra room, and with that I've been very happy. So let's just talk about the ups and downs with it. About 115 hours, like I said, on the bike. About 100 hours had to go through with the new chain and sprockets, which I didn't think that was too bad for the factory stuff. The wheels have held up great. The spokes seem to be kind of small compared to a regular race bike or the RR bike, but I haven't had any issues with any kind of damage. So those have been abused quite a bit. I like to ride the rocks and the logs and the hill climbs and the more extreme terrain. So far, no issues there. The engine has been pretty much flawless. I did have a small leak, if I can show you here. This thermostat housing, it had a small leak when I first got the bike, and what they come to find out, of course it was covered under warranty, the O-ring on the head gasket leaked a little bit of basically compression by, which is pressurizing the coolant system, and would cause a small leak right here. Never leaked bad, it only just dripped a little bit in the garage, but the dealer covered it under warranty, took care of it, put a new head O-ring on the head, and problem solved. This thing, when I first got it, it used a lot of fuel, and I started paying attention to it more, and I believe it was more leaking out of the overflow than it was burning it. So I adjusted my floats up a little bit, and that made a big improvement. And then to get the jetting spot on, a lot of guys talked about the JD jet kit, so I went ahead and put the JD jet kit in it and used his settings that comes with the kit, and I've been really pleased. If I don't push this thing too hard, I can get over 50 miles on a tank of gas before I hit reserve. And so I think that's pretty good for just a little over 2 gallons. But as far as the rest of the engine, no issues there. Picked up some aftermarket shifters and pedals, just to help out, keep from bending those things, but the stock ones did fine. I still have those for backups. Went with the Unibiker radiator guards. I like them because they have these brackets that actually go, you can't see it's behind this thermostat housing, but just a bracket like this goes through the other side of the radiator, and so in the chance of a side impact, the other side of the brace also helps absorb some of the impact. And in the front, it's got good coverage there. And I don't know if you can see, there's a pretty good impact right there, probably from a tree limb or something. But they've worked great so far, no complaints. Not that difficult to put on. And I like the slim line, the weather design and everything. Enduro Engineering skid plate, full metal skid plate, and the Fastway linkage guard. Still, I think Stillwell's head is touching those. And I started out with the factory skid plate, got tossed pretty quick because it's pretty thin. I went to a heavier duty plastic one that has a little bitty tail that just kind of extends off the skid plate to protect your shock and your linkage. And that didn't last very long before that wore through. The bottom of the shock and the linkage wore through the plastic, so got rid of that thing and beefed it up, and should have gone this route the first time. It's a well-made skid plate, and it takes a lot of abuse. But we're still running the factory pipe with the P3 carbon guard. It hasn't taken that many hard hits. You can see there it's got some rash on it from rubbing on rocks and the ground a little bit. but I'm pleased with the factory exhaust. I have no intentions of upgrading to anything else. I'll just leave it alone. I will say the P3 carbon guard does not fit very well. I can show you down here, see the gap there. And I can easily get my finger in here, so I was not that impressed with that P3 guard. It does work, but for $180 or whatever it was, you'd think it'd fit a little bit better. Again, the engine's been pretty much flawless. For a bigger guy, heavier guy, the stock suspension is probably the only downfall to the bike. So I rode it for a little while, put heavier springs in it, and that made a big difference. And then after doing some more research, I decided to go ahead and send it off to a company out in, I believe it was Montana, Amp All Moto Performance. The guy there, Aaron, that owns the place and does all the suspension work, he has a RR and also an Xtrainer, and so he's been able to ride these bikes back to back and has found some pretty good stuff to do to the forks. You don't have to buy the $300 plus compression kit for it. He uses just the factory forks, does some revalving, and actually has custom made springs made for that fork, way heavier than what Beta offers. So that helps. His theory is the forks ride too low in the stroke, and so that's why it's hard to get them plush. So with the heavier spring, keeps that front end up in the soft spot, and made a big difference. Really pleased with how they turned out. I've sent another friend of mine, had his stuff sent off to the Amp Moto, or All Moto Performance, and it came back, and he said it was a huge difference. Really transformed the bike. And then shortly after getting my suspension back, I developed the seal in the rear shock started leaking. So I called Aaron and said, hey man, this thing's leaking. Do I need a special seal, a special oil? He said, no. He said, I can. If you'll send me the shock for, I think, $50, there's a KYB upgrade he does. He's figured out a way to machine the shock body to put a more common, more robust seal in that shock body. So if you guys are having any issues with your rear shock, blowing the seals or leaking fluid, that's something to check into with him. I don't know what all involved, but for $50, it can't be that much. And the shock's held up great ever since. And then he adds his own recipe for the rear spring also. Of course, typical damage, put a fin on there. I believe I've gone through, that is not the factory rear rotor. I think it lasted probably close to 100 hours maybe less. And I had to go ahead and upgrade it. New pads, still run the stock front rotor. Tubeless in the rear, usually run about 5 PSI. All the plastics held up well. The graphics have not been all that bad. The one that has the most damage is this right back here. I get a little carried away pressure washing this bike, and these tend to peel up at the pressure washer. So a friend of mine told me, he said, when it dries, take some rubbing alcohol, clean the plastic, flip the sticker up, clean the sticker real good with alcohol, let it dry, put it back down and put a heat gun to it, and it'll get tacky again, and you can push that back down and hopefully it'll last. So I think my graphics have held up pretty well, considering Beta isn't known for the best graphics in the world. This right here lasted many hours with my Alpine Star Tech 8s, and then when I went to the City Crossfire, SRS3 or something like that, they started to chew this graphic up here, so that's kind of due to my boots. Still running the stock gearing, if I didn't mention that. Like I said, I like to ride the slower technical stuff, and I wanted to gear it down just a little bit so I could run second gear more often. But the way it works out is you realize your chain sprockets are wore out and you're trying to go riding the next day. So I hit my factory dealer up and ended up with the Super Sprox rear. And this is a 17, and so I think it's running a 48. Oh, excuse me, 51. The new ones come with the 48, so a little bit different setup there, but all in all, pretty well. I went with the BRP sub mount, and I believe it's designed to put a steering dampener in here, but I never have had one before, so I'm not gonna waste the money. But one thing I wanted to do is, because I'm so tall, put these bars forward as far as I can. And with this mount, you can only put them in the back, farthest back, or the middle position. To go to the very front position, there's actually a clearance issue. And so you can see I machined this little bitty block here. I think it's about 1/2 inch tall. And I used a milling machine to make it, but in all reality, it's just a little, I mean, you could use some washers or whatever in some longer bolts. There's nothing really technical about it. I'm trying to get you in there best I can. So, but Soccer Pro bins, big fan of those. Headlight still works. Plastics took us some abuse running through the trees, but all in all, still pretty good shape. Like I said, the bike's been great, pretty much flawless. The only issue I had was the coolant issue with the O-ring on the head, and that was covered under warranty. One mod I did do is, this is the clutch slave cylinder out of I believe maybe a 13 350 RR 4-stroke, and it's supposed to have a bigger diameter piston, which makes for an easier clutch pull. And for some reason, these Xtrainers have a really stiff clutch. So I first tried what the Australian guys said, to stack up some thin washers on your clutch springs, and that helped a little bit, but I wasn't really satisfied with it, so I went ahead and found this thing online. It wasn't much, 50, 60, 70 bucks maybe, got it. And then went ahead and ordered some new lighter clutch springs, a company called 2Ride, I believe. If you'll Google 2Ride Xtrainer springs, they have softer clutch springs. And now between the slave cylinder and the lighter clutch springs, my clutch pull is not quite a trials bike, but it's very close. So if you're looking for a lighter clutch pull, I strongly encourage you to check out that slave cylinder and also the 2Ride springs. Now the new, sometime around 18 or 19, the Xtrainer got the new clutch. I believe it has 6 springs now, and I think a mod some guys are doing are just taking 2 of the springs out, so you only have 4. And I got a buddy that just did that. I'll find out this week how that did. But with the lighter clutch springs, like I said, I've recently lost some weight, but I was riding this thing at about 215 pounds in street clothes, maybe more. Plus all my gear, water, tools, everything. And there was I have no clutch issues, no slippage, nothing. And I abuse my clutch quite a bit, so something to think about, because modulating the clutch on this bike is a big part when you get into the technical terrain. I'm not a fan of the recluse. If you ride trials enough, you'll learn how to use the clutch, and you'll like to feel having control over that. So I think that's about it. I haven't had any issues with any fork seals leaking. Of course, they got rebuilt when they were serviced and revalved, resprung. All in all, the bike has been pretty much flawless. 115 hours, and it has not been ridden easy. Of course, I try to keep it well maintained. It's pressure washed every time and lubed up, cleaned. Keep my air filter clean. I only run 100% gas through it, and overall, great bike. So if you're thinking about one of these, I strongly encourage you to try to find one. Find a buddy that's got one, and find a dealer that might let you ride one. And the only downside you're going to notice right off the bat is the suspension. It's more noticeable at high speeds. At slow speeds, it's very soft and plush. But there is a fix for that, and it's not terribly expensive. So, like I said, if you're thinking about it, give one a try. You're probably going to like it.